This machine here is a joiner, one of the more simple machines in the shop, and yet for what it does, it's really, really hard to replace it. This machine is basically a heavy-duty electric plane. It takes material off. If we take and look into where our blades are, right in here, this is the guard. We have in here a head, it's called the head, with blades in it. And these blades are very sharp, but all they do is just take the edge of the wood off or whatever you happen to be running through the joiner. Now, on this machine here, we have several parts. This long thing here is called the fence. This front part of the machine is called the in-feed table or front table. This is called back here the back table or out-feed table. It is called that because the wood will go through in this direction. So this will be the out or the back feed. This is the front or the in feed. We have down here a depth control. There is a little guide here showing you how much to go. This particular machine has a pre-planned handle of where it actually works. We go up and down for whatever cut we're going to make. Now when we take and joint wood, what is called, we would feed it in like this. We have our edge. Now, if your wood goes in somewhat crooked, it will come out crooked. It's not a machine that's going to make a 90-degree corner. Just edges. It goes up here. We feed it in, and normally the deepest cut we take here is going to be 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 inch for our depth. Now, to feed it in, and the problem with this machine is extremely simple to use. But if you do have an accident, it's probably pretty serious. If you would ever get your fingers caught in these blades, there's just nothing left to sew back on. And I know that sounds kind of gross, but it just chews it up. This machine is a machine which, of course, you need to ask your instructor each time. A machine like this, a joiner, is normally classified by the blade size. This one is 6 inches. If we were to take a ruler and measure it here, some of the smaller ones at home are sometimes 4 inches. And some of the bigger ones in shops, you might in high school shops, find an 8-inch joiner. On our fence, we have a two-way handle control here. Two main controls besides the depth control. And this does two different things. When it's basically like a socket with a handle on it. When you go back and loosen up here, you can control the angle of the fence. Now, joiners can be used to put an angle on the edge. There is an angle gauge down here to see what you have, and there's also a stop block in the back here to make sure you get into 90 degrees. Now when you make any adjustments on this, you need to get something called a tri-square and make sure you're back to 90 degrees if that's indeed what you want. And most of the operations we do are 90 degrees, but you've got to set that and use the tri-square. Make sure you've got it, then you can tighten it down. Good idea that if you're going to use the joiner for the first time, that during the period that you always come up with a tri-square, make sure that you are 90 degrees or whatever angle that you need. Now the second control, if we move this up here, is the, loosen that up, now we can move the fence back and forth. And there are several reasons why we may want to do that. It's going to depend on the width of your wood. Occasionally we'll get a nick in the blade, so we have to move away from that nick. And maybe the nick isn't bad enough to send it out and get it sharp. But two-way control. Okay, now let's go over and look how to actually use the machine. When we get ready to join a piece of wood, we have to look at our piece of wood. And all wood has grain. And normally what we're going to be joining on here is lengths of wood. We'll be joining on the edge. And first of all, we have to determine if the wood is long enough. This particular machine is a 6-inch joiner when we measured our blades earlier. And the general rule is that your wood has to be twice as long as the blade. In other words, for a 6-inch joiner, our wood has to be at least 12 inches long. If this one is just barely, it's about 12 3/4 inch. So now we know that it's long enough. The other thing we have to do, and for beginner this gets a little hard, we have to look at the grain and see how it's going. This is a piece of pine, and pine normally is fairly straight grain. But sometimes, and particularly on hardwoods like maple and walnut, you'll see your grain kind of moving around. And we want it so the grain is coming, if it's not straight, it's at least pointing down towards the in-feed table. If it's not, and we were to join it, you would hear kind of a cracking noise, and we get something called checking. Now sometimes that checking, which is actually the splintering the wood because you're going against the grain, is not avoidable, because some of the hardwoods, particularly maple, will change grain in the middle of a piece of wood. Now to use this joiner, when we go through, the wood has to be in contact with the fence and the table. Now when I go through here, another rule is we try to never have our hands over the blade. Now we have a guard here, but as a secondary backup, we try to keep our hands away from that. And that means I'm going to have to walk with it. Now, the other problem is too, that when we go through here, I have to try to keep even pressure on it. If I did not, it is possible to have a cut that will be deeper on one end than the other, and then your wood starts to get out of square. Okay, I'm going to turn the machine on. I'll look behind me. Now there's one thing that is extremely important on this machine, is we do have to have the suction system running. If not, the machine will very quickly fill up with sawdust. I'm going to leave the suction system off now because it creates enough noise that you probably couldn't hear me even with the machine off. Okay, again, I went in there. I kept my hands away from the guard area. I went in holding it. I came up here and walked with it, held it down. I put my hand down again, trying to keep it away from here. Now, if the wood was below the fence, then we'd have to use some type of push stick. We don't want our hands below the fence here. Okay, again, turn the machine on to do it one more time. And there we have a very nicely jointed edge. I went with the grain, so I didn't shatter any. So again, remember, you've got to be against the fence, against the table. Of course, be aware of what your depth control adjustment is. Make sure your fence is at 90 degrees, or whatever angle you're going to use. And if you do change the fence for an angle, make sure that when you're done, you put it back to 90 degrees. That's normal shop common courtesy. When we run our wood through, we keep our hands away from, of course, above the fence and away from that blade area. Because if we would slip, we'd have a lot of problems. Real serious problems. Now there's one other thing, and sometimes you'll run into how to joint in grain. And that's very difficult to show in a shop anymore, because first of all, in grain is our wood right here. We run it through and join it. When we do that, we can normally only do about a 1/16 inch at a time. The main problem we have in a shop like this is finding a board that's big enough. This board is 6-7 inches wide. I looked around, and this piece of maple was about the biggest one I could find, and it is not 12 inches. So I can't even demonstrate it. But to join it, we would join in a little bit, just like this. I would run it into the joiner an inch or two. I could turn it around and join it through. The reason we do that is if I didn't join it here and turn it around, I would probably break off some wood. It would chip off. So in grain is something we don't do a lot of. In grain, the end of a wood is very hard. It's much harder than the side. And so we take off very little at a time. We go in about an inch, back it out, turn it around, and go through again. Again, the main problem is, though, it has to be over 12 inches in width. So again, in reviewing, this machine is extreme help. And it's a very simple machine to use, but if you misuse it, you could have a very serious accident. So be careful when you do use it. Make sure, of course, you ask your instructor's permission once you're checked off, and make sure that the suction system is on.